The doctors had given up on Emma Ashford 3 years ago. 7 specialists, 4 countries, $2 million spent, all concluded the same. Permanent blindness. Born this way. Accept it. Yet Kate Morrison, the new maid in her crisp uniform and careful movements, stood in the doorway of the little girl's bedroom, watching something no one else had noticed. Emma's head turned slightly toward the window when sunlight broke through the clouds. Her fingers paused mid-air when shadows moved across the wall. The medical files Kate had quietly borrowed after everyone went to sleep told a very different story than what the family had been told. And what Kate saw in those pages made her hands tremble. Because if she was right, someone in this mansion had been lying for 7 years. The Ashford estate sat on 12 acres in Greenwich, Connecticut, where old money whispered through manicured hedges and new fortunes shouted from glass facades. Richard Ashford had built his technology empire from nothing, or so the business magazines claimed. His wife Victoria came from fashion royalty, the kind of woman who wore pearls to breakfast and never raised her voice above a cultivated murmur. Their son James was away at boarding school most of the year, which left little Emma in a mansion that felt more like a museum than a home. Kate had been working there for 2 weeks when she first noticed the inconsistencies. The employment agency had placed her quickly, too quickly, she thought, but she needed the work, and the Ashfords needed help after their previous housekeeper retired. At 28 years old, with steady hands and a quiet demeanor, Kate fit their requirements perfectly. They wanted someone who could clean, prepare meals, and most importantly, stay invisible. What they did not know was that those careful hands had once sutured wounds in emergency rooms, and that the woman who now made their beds had been 3 months away from completing her pediatric neurology residency before everything fell apart. The first week passed in a blur of routines. Kate rose before dawn, prepared breakfast that Victoria barely touched, and cleaned rooms that already seemed immaculate. Emma spent most days in her suite on the 2nd floor, attended by a rotating cast of tutors and therapists who came and went like ghosts. The little girl never complained, never cried out in frustration. She sat by her window with her hands folded in her lap, her unseeing eyes turned toward a world she had supposedly never witnessed. But Kate had spent 4 years in medical school and 3 years in residency before her world imploded. She had lost everything, her career, her fiancé, her reputation, when she reported a senior surgeon for operating while impaired. The hospital had sided with the surgeon, a renowned specialist, who brought in millions in revenue. Kate's contract was not renewed. Her complaints were dismissed as those of an overly emotional resident who could not handle pressure. She had been blacklisted from every major hospital in the Northeast. The last 18 months had been a descent through progressively more desperate employment, until she found herself scrubbing toilets in a mansion, trying to forget what those hands had once been trained to do. Yet old instincts died hard, and when she watched Emma sitting in her window seat, something nagged at the edges of her consciousness. It started with small observations. The way Emma's head turned just slightly when her mother entered the room, as if she could sense not just presence, but direction. The way her fingers traced the edges of her breakfast plate with unusual precision, never quite bumping into the glass of juice positioned at 10 o'clock. The way she navigated her bedroom furniture without the hesitant shuffle of the truly blind, moving instead with a confidence that suggested some level of spatial awareness. Kate said nothing at first. She had learned the hard way that speaking up from her position led nowhere good. But she watched, and she wondered. And late at night, when the mansion settled into silence, she found herself thinking about the medical texts she had sold to pay rent, the diagnostic skills she had worked so hard to develop. Emma's case felt wrong in ways Kate could not quite articulate, a dissonance between what the diagnosis claimed and what she observed daily. The temptation became unbearable after 10 days. Late one night, Kate stood outside the study where Richard Ashford kept his files. The door was locked, but she had cleaned this room enough times to know where the spare key was hidden. Her hands shook as she turned it, every instinct screaming that this was wrong, that she was risking everything. But the image of Emma sitting in darkness, while something felt medically inconsistent, pushed her forward. The medical records told a story that made Kate's blood run cold. Emma Ashford had not been born blind. The diagnosis had come at 6 months old, shortly after a routine vaccination appointment with the family's private physician, Dr. Jonathan Pierce. The symptoms had appeared gradually: reduced pupil response, failure to track moving objects, no startle reflex to sudden light. By her first birthday, the diagnosis was complete: cortical visual impairment, severe and irreversible. The optic nerves appeared intact, but the brain simply was not processing visual information. What followed was a cascade of consultations. Specialists in New York, Boston, Los Angeles, even a controversial clinic in Switzerland. Every expert had examined the case, studied the scans, and arrived at the same conclusion. The damage was done. Emma would never see. The family should focus on adaptation, not false hope. Richard and Victoria had eventually accepted this verdict, channeling their considerable resources into providing their daughter with the best possible quality of life within her limitations. But Kate had reviewed enough pediatric neurological cases to spot patterns others might miss. The progression was wrong. Cortical visual impairment from early infancy typically presented differently, with more severe developmental delays in other areas. Emma was bright, articulate, emotionally responsive, everything except sighted. And there were the scans themselves, pristine images that showed no obvious lesions, no structural abnormalities that would account for complete blindness. Kate pulled out her phone and photographed several key pages, her hands shaking as she worked. This was crossing every ethical line, invading privacy in ways that could land her in serious legal trouble. But if she was right about what those records suggested, then Emma had been living in artificial darkness for 7 years, and someone knew exactly why. She spent the next 2 days researching obsessively during her breaks, reaching out to former classmates through carefully worded messages, consulting medical databases she technically no longer had access to. The pattern became clearer with each piece of information she gathered. The symptoms, the timeline, the pristine scans that showed healthy neural pathways. It all pointed toward something that made Kate feel physically sick. Pharmacological mydriasis, drug-induced pupil dilation, but not from standard diagnostic drops. This looked like chronic exposure to anticholinergic medications, specifically tropicamide or a similar compound. In standard doses for eye examinations, such medications were harmless, wearing off within hours, but administered regularly in carefully calibrated amounts, they could cause persistent light sensitivity severe enough to mimic blindness. The victim would experience overwhelming photophobia, their world reduced to agonizing brightness. Over time, especially in a developing infant brain, this could train the neural pathways to shut down visual processing entirely as a protective mechanism. Even after the drug was discontinued, the learned avoidance would persist. Kate felt rage building in her chest as the implications crystallized. This was not medical error. This was systematic, deliberate, calculated abuse. Someone had been poisoning Emma Ashford, and that someone had medical access and knowledge. The most obvious suspect was Dr. Jonathan Pierce, the family physician who had been present at the onset of symptoms and had controlled Emma's care ever since. But why would a respected physician systematically blind a patient? Kate spent another night digging into Pierce's background, using the research skills she had developed during residency. What she found was a web of financial incentives that made her stomach turn. Pierce was not just Emma's doctor, He was a shareholder in 3 companies that manufactured assistive devices for the blind. He sat on the advisory board of a foundation that funded research into visual impairments. He had published multiple papers on cortical visual impairment, using case studies that matched Emma's timeline with suspicious precision. He consulted for pharmaceutical companies developing treatments for rare visual disorders. Emma Ashford was worth more to Jonathan Pierce, blind, than sighted. She was his research subject, his case study, his justification for grants and speaking fees and consulting positions. For 7 years, he had been systematically stealing a child's vision to maintain his income stream and professional reputation. The next morning, Kate made a decision that terrified her. She found Emma in her usual spot by the window, small hands resting on a Braille book. "Miss Emma," Kate said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Can I ask you something, just between us?" The little girl's head tilted slightly. "You are Kate," she said, her voice clear and precise. "You hum when you clean my room. Classical music, I think." Kate felt her throat tighten. "You have a good ear. Emma, I wanted to ask, when you sit here by the window, what do you think about?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I think about what everyone else sees," she finally said. "They talk about the leaves changing colors and the snow falling and my mother's new dress, but I do not know what any of those things look like. It is like everyone is speaking a language I was supposed to learn but never did. What if I told you that I think you did learn that language once, and that someone took it away from you?" The little girl's fingers stopped moving on her book. "What do you mean?" Kate chose her words carefully, aware that she was about to shatter a child's world. "I used to be a doctor, Emma, a different kind of doctor than Dr. Pierce, but I learned how to read medical tests and understand how the brain works. I have been watching you, and some things do not match what your diagnosis says. I think someone gave you medicine that made your brain stop understanding what your eyes see. And I think if we could figure out what that medicine was and stop giving it to you, your brain might be able to learn how to see again." Emma's face had gone very pale. "Dr. Pierce has been our doctor forever. He would never hurt me. He gives me checkups to make sure I am healthy. Sometimes people do bad things for reasons that make sense to them," Kate said gently. "Sometimes those reasons have to do with money or fame or things that have nothing to do with what is right. I think Dr. Pierce has been making you sick during those checkups, Emma. I think he has been doing it for a very long time." The little girl was shaking now. "My parents would know. They would protect me." "I think your parents trusted Dr. Pierce completely, the way families are supposed to trust their doctors. But Emma, I need to tell them what I have found. And when I do, things are going to get very complicated. Dr. Pierce is going to say I am lying. He is going to say I am just a maid who does not know what she is talking about. And he might be right. I might be wrong about all of this, but I do not think I am." Emma reached out, her small hand finding Kate's arm with surprising accuracy. "If you tell them and you are wrong, you will lose your job. If you tell them and you are right, Dr. Pierce will try to hurt you." "I know." Kate covered Emma's hand with her own. "But I cannot stay quiet. Not when I think there is a chance you could see. You deserve to watch butterflies and read regular books and see your mother's face when she smiles at you. You deserve the life that was stolen from you." "What if I am too scared?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "What if trying to see hurts too much?" "Then we will go slowly," Kate promised. "We will take it one tiny step at a time, and if it gets too hard, we will stop and rest. But Emma, I think you are braver than you know. I think you have been brave every single day, living in darkness and never complaining. This would just be a different kind of brave." That evening, Kate requested a meeting with Richard and Victoria Ashford. They received her in the study, clearly puzzled by their maid's formal request. Richard glanced at his watch impatiently, while Victoria maintained her practiced social smile. They expected a complaint about working conditions or a request for time off. "Thank you for seeing me," Kate began, her hands clasped to hide their trembling. "I need to discuss something very serious regarding Emma's medical care." Richard's expression shifted from impatience to concern. "Has something happened? Should we call Dr. Pierce?" "No, sir. I believe Dr. Pierce is the problem." Kate took a breath and began laying out her case. She explained her background, her medical training, the observations she had made over 2 weeks. She presented the evidence she had gathered, photograph by photograph, medical journal by medical journal. She explained tropicamide poisoning and learned blindness, the financial incentives surrounding Emma's case, the pattern of symptoms that did not quite match the diagnosis everyone had accepted. The Ashfords listened in stunned silence. Victoria's cultivated composure cracked as the implications sank in. Richard's face went from businesslike attention to ashen disbelief. When Kate finished, the silence stretched unbearably. "You are telling us," Richard finally said, his voice dangerous and quiet, "that Dr. Pierce, a man I have known for 15 years, who delivered my son, who I have trusted completely, has been systematically poisoning my daughter. For money." "Yes, sir. I believe the active poisoning stopped several years ago, once Emma's brain had been trained to avoid visual processing. After that, he simply needed to maintain the diagnosis through regular examinations and continued insistence that her condition was irreversible. Emma's neural pathways had learned to interpret light as pain, so even without the drug, she continued to experience blindness." Victoria stood abruptly and walked to the window, her shoulders shaking. 7 years, she whispered. "Emma has never seen snow fall, never watched the ocean, never looked at her own reflection. And you are saying this was done deliberately?" "I believe so, ma'am. Dr. Pierce has significant financial stakes in Emma's continued blindness. The research papers, the consulting fees, the advisory positions, they all depend on maintaining a rare, incurable case. Emma was worth more to him blind than sighted." Richard's hands clenched into fists. "If this is true, if you are right about any of this, then I will destroy him. But Kate—" He fixed her with a sharp look. "You broke into my private files. You accessed confidential medical records without authorization. Those photographs on your phone are evidence of theft." "I know, sir." Kate met his gaze steadily. "I accept whatever consequences come from that. But I could not stay silent while Emma suffered, not when I believed there was a chance to help her. Even if it means losing this job, even if it means you press charges, I had to speak up." Victoria turned from the window, tears streaming down her face. "Why did you not mention your medical background when you applied?" "Because no one hires blacklisted doctors to clean their homes, ma'am. And because I was not looking to practice medicine anymore. I just wanted to survive." Kate's voice cracked slightly. "But when I saw Emma, when I looked at her records, I could not ignore what my training told me. Some instincts do not die, even when your career does." Richard studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone. "I am calling my attorney. Then we are going to call every medical expert I can reach. And Kate, you are not going anywhere. We are going to need you to explain everything you just told me to people who can actually do something about it." The confrontation happened 5 days later. Richard and Victoria had assembled a team of independent specialists who reviewed Emma's case with fresh eyes and confirmed Kate's suspicions. The pattern was undeniable once someone looked for it. A forensic toxicologist found trace amounts of tropicamide in hair samples taken from Emma's baby book, samples that dated back 7 years. A pediatric neurologist confirmed that Emma's symptoms were consistent with pharmacologically induced photophobia rather than true cortical blindness. Dr. Jonathan Pierce arrived at the Ashford estate expecting a routine consultation. He walked into an ambush. Richard's attorney was present, along with 2 independent medical experts and a representative from the state medical board. Pierce's confident smile faltered when he saw the assembled group. "Thank you for coming on short notice," Richard said, his voice arctic. "We have some questions about Emma's treatment history, specifically about the tropicamide you have been administering during her regular examinations." The color drained from Pierce's face. "I do not know what you are talking about. Tropicamide is standard for pupil dilation during eye exams." "In standard doses?" Kate interrupted from her position by the wall. She had been invited to attend, despite her lack of official standing. "But you have been giving Emma doses far exceeding diagnostic necessity. You have been doing it systematically since she was 6 months old, and you continued even after her blindness was established to ensure her brain never had a chance to recover from the initial damage." Pierce's eyes fixed on Kate with undisguised hatred. "You are the maid. You have no medical authority, no right to make accusations." "I am a doctor," Kate said quietly. "Or I was, before I made the mistake of reporting unethical behavior and got blacklisted for it. My medical degree is still valid, Dr. Pierce, and my ability to recognize systematic abuse has not diminished." One of the independent specialists leaned forward. "We have reviewed the case extensively, Dr. Pierce. The forensic evidence is compelling. The pattern of symptoms is consistent with chronic anticholinergic exposure, and your financial interests in maintaining Emma's blindness create a clear motive. The medical board will be conducting a formal investigation, but we wanted to give you an opportunity to explain yourself before this becomes public." Pierce seemed to crumble before their eyes. The polished physician disappeared, leaving only a desperate man facing the destruction of everything he had built. "She was just supposed to be mildly impaired," he whispered. "Just enough to qualify for the research studies, to justify the consultations. I never meant for it to be permanent. But then the diagnosis was complete blindness, and the grants were so substantial, and I thought I could taper the treatment and her vision would return on its own. But it did not," Kate said, "because by then her brain had learned to shut down visual processing as a protective mechanism. You created a psychological blindness that persisted even after the chemical cause was removed. You trained a baby's brain to choose darkness over agony, and then you profited from that choice for 7 years." Victoria made a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. "You used my daughter like an experiment. You stole her childhood. She has never seen a sunrise, never watched birds fly, never looked into my eyes while I told her I loved her. And you did that for research grants?" Pierce had no defense. The confession was documented, witnessed, recorded. The medical board began proceedings to revoke his license permanently. Criminal charges were filed. The pharmaceutical companies and research institutions that had benefited from Emma's case faced their own investigations. Pierce's carefully constructed career collapsed in a matter of days, his reputation destroyed beyond repair. But for Emma, the real work was just beginning. Kate assembled a treatment team with Richard's full support and unlimited resources. They started in Emma's bedroom with blackout curtains and a single small nightlight, teaching her brain that light did not have to mean suffering. Emma cried during the first sessions, overwhelmed by sensations her mind had suppressed for years. But Kate sat beside her, this young woman who had risked everything to tell the truth, guiding her through the discomfort with steady encouragement. "I know it hurts," Kate said during one particularly difficult session. "Your brain is remembering something it learned to forget. But Emma, this pain is temporary. It will get better. And on the other side of this pain is a whole world waiting for you to see it. Weeks passed. The nightlight became a small lamp. Emma began to distinguish shapes, vague, undefined, but present. She described seeing shadows move, light and dark separating into distinct areas. Her parents watched with tears streaming down their faces as their daughter reached toward a light source for the first time in conscious memory, no longer flinching away in automatic terror. Months passed. Emma could navigate her room without guidance, could identify her mother by silhouette before Victoria spoke, could tell the difference between sunlight and lamplight. The specialists were cautiously optimistic. Her optic nerves had remained healthy despite years of disuse, and her young brain retained remarkable plasticity. She would likely never have perfect vision. The early damage had left permanent effects. But she would see. She would watch clouds drift across the sky and read printed words and look at photographs of herself. Richard and Victoria tried repeatedly to compensate Kate for what she had done. They offered her money, offered to fund the legal battle to clear her name and restore her medical career, offered her a permanent position with a salary that would make her financially secure for life. Kate declined everything except permission to continue working as Emma's primary therapeutic support during her recovery. Why? Victoria asked, genuinely confused. Kate, you saved our daughter. You destroyed your own life to tell us the truth. Let us help you rebuild. I did not do this to rebuild my life. Kate replied, I did this because I am a doctor, even if no hospital will hire me. And doctors are supposed to heal, not stay silent while children suffer. On the 6-month anniversary of Kate's arrival at the estate, Emma stood in the garden at twilight. The world was still blurry, colors muted and edges soft. But she could see the shapes of flowers in their beds, could watch the sky transition from blue to purple. She could see stars beginning to emerge, tiny points of light that no longer caused her pain. Kate stood beside her, this young woman who had traded security for truth. Richard and Victoria had convinced her to stay on, not as a maid, but as Emma's companion and continued therapeutic support. Kate had a small cottage on the estate grounds now, a space that felt more like home than anywhere she had lived since her career imploded. She was not practicing medicine officially, but she was healing someone, which felt like enough. Kate? Emma's voice pulled her from her thoughts. The little girl was squinting up at the sky, concentration visible on her face. Those tiny lights, are those really stars? Those are stars, Kate confirmed, her throat tight. They are smaller than I imagined, but so pretty. Emma smiled, and it transformed her whole face. Thank you for making me see them. You did the hard work, Emma. I just showed you where to look. No? The little girl said firmly. You believed something was wrong when everyone else said everything was fine. You told the truth even though it was scary. That is what heroes do. Kate felt tears prick her eyes. I just did what any doctor should do. Maybe, Emma said. But you are the only one who did it. Richard and Victoria joined them in the garden, drawn by their daughter's laughter. The family stood together as darkness settled over the estate, watching Emma discover the night sky for the first time. There would be more therapy ahead, more gradual progress. Pierce's trial would bring publicity the family would rather avoid. Emma's vision would never be completely normal, and she would always see the world slightly differently than others. But she would see it. That was what mattered. Kate understood something profound as she watched Emma trace constellations with her finger. Her medical career might never be officially restored. The hospitals might never admit they had been wrong to blacklist her. Her name might never be cleared in the traditional sense. But standing here, watching a child experience vision for the first time in her conscious memory, Kate realized that redemption did not require institutional validation. Sometimes redemption looked like having the courage to speak truth to power, even when you had nothing left to lose. Sometimes it looked like risking the only job you could find because staying silent felt like a betrayal of everything you had trained to be. Sometimes it looked like a little girl seeing stars and knowing that your voice, dismissed and devalued as it was, had made that moment possible. Kate had lost her career by speaking up once before. She had nearly stayed silent this time, too scarred by the consequences to risk herself again. But Emma's darkness had been louder than Kate's fear, and in finding her voice again, in choosing truth over safety, Kate had discovered something more valuable than any medical license. She had remembered who she was. Not a maid, not a blacklisted resident, but a doctor, in the truest sense of the word. Someone who healed because healing was what mattered, not because institutions granted permission. Someone who spoke up because children deserved protection, not because speaking up was safe. Emma reached up and took Kate's hand, squeezing it tight. "Will you stay?" the little girl asked. "Even after I can see everything clearly, as long as you need me," Kate promised. And she meant it, because this was not just about Emma anymore. It was about Kate, too, about reclaiming purpose from the wreckage of her old life, about proving that being blacklisted did not mean being worthless, and that doctors who told uncomfortable truths were not the problem. They were exactly what medicine needed. The stars grew brighter as full darkness fell. Emma watched them with wonder, this child who had lived in blindness because adults had failed to protect her. But she was not blind anymore. She was seeing, healing, growing, and standing beside her was the young woman who had refused to look away, who had chosen truth over safety and healing over silence. Sometimes that was all it took to change everything. One person willing to see what others ignored, one voice refusing to stay quiet, one choice to do what was right, even when the cost was high. Kate had paid that cost before and lost everything. This time, she had paid it and found something instead. Purpose, redemption, home. And watching Emma see stars for the first time, Kate knew with absolute certainty that she would pay that cost again, as many times as necessary. Because some truths were worth telling, regardless of the consequences. And some children were worth fighting for, no matter how powerful the people who harmed them. Emma Ashford could see, and Kate Morrison had helped make that possible. In the end, that was all that mattered.